Good evening and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Luan and I will be presenting to you today. I am in the beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. Sunny but a bit windy today. It would be great to see who we have with us. So please say hi in the chat, tell us your name, and also tell us where you are. Just a little bit about me before we get started and while we wait for all those hellos to come in. I am a language practitioner, a speaking examiner, and a tutor trainer. But best of all, I have been an English teacher for over 13 years. It's been amazing. I can't complain. I have taught students from all over the world, all ages, all levels. It's been a wonderful experience, and I'm very excited to be part of your experience by presenting these really, really useful webinars to you to help you improve every single part of your teaching experience. So let's see who we've got with us today. Enough about me. We have quite a few names that have come in. Hello, Rachel. Rachel is from South Wales in the UK. We have Moments. Hello to you. We have Kushkins, hi there. We have Nasi Saeed. Also, do tell us where you're from. It's always lovely just to see which corners of the world we're communicating with today. We have Melissa from Toronto, hi to you. Nathan from sunny South Africa. Nice to see you here, Nathan. And then we have Jay from Jamaica. Chandre, hello from Cape Town. Yes, sunny but windy Cape Town. And then we have Sally Ann, and Sally Ann is in Oman. Eugenia, hello from South Africa. And we have Ruby from Southern California. Carol from Jamaica. Wow, we also have Be Happy, and Be Happy is from Anaheim or California. I've got Roy T. And then, yes, and Kushkins, you are South African and in South Korea. Thank you for clarifying that. Alex from France, hello to you. Joe from Alabama, USA, hi there. Sandra from Estonia. Benedicta from the Netherlands, hello. Erica from Australia, living in Spain. Wow, amazing. And then we also have Hamza from Cape Town. Puckman from Hong Kong, hi to you. Feel welcome today. Portia from South Africa and Laura from Argentina. We also have Jen from Dallas. And yeah, that's it for now. But I'm sure as people join, please feel welcome, get cozy, and we'll get started with today's webinar. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Only today's topic will be discussed and presented in this webinar. You will have the opportunity to ask questions. We love questions. So please hold on to them though until we reach the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. That's when you type those questions in when I open that up. The reason being, sometimes if you type them too early in the presentation, I miss them and I unfortunately can't get to them later on. And I really do want to answer as many questions as I can. So also remember that only questions related to today's topic will be answered. But if you have questions, anything additional outside of today's discussion, you can of course send these to tutor support, where our staff members are more than happy to assist you. All right, so as you can see, today is all about teaching beginners. And for me, this is such an important topic to discuss because so many of us start right there. We teach beginners very often when you're new in your TEFL profession, when you've been newly certified and you're looking for employment. Very often schools may place you with a beginner group. And that's so that you're able to learn as you go along. Beginners don't ask questions that are too complex. So teachers very often don't get overwhelmed teaching beginners. And also, if you do make the odd mistake, it's usually not a big deal as long as your target language is clear and simple. Right, so let's get started because we've got so much information to get through and I really, really do want to cover absolutely everything. So let's think about that term beginner. There are various terms associated with beginner, so it's important for you to be familiar with them. And what do we mean by beginner? So if a student knows no English at all, apart from the odd word like hotel or taxi, they are an absolute beginner. So that's an important term to note. An absolute beginner is literally starting from zero. I've had students come to various schools where I was teaching, and they'd knock at the door and say, "This class." And I'd have to really, really just get in there, grade my language, and speak to them so that I can actually get the information from them. That's where many, many start, and that would be classified as an absolute beginner. So these days, it would be highly unusual, but not impossible, for a student to know absolutely no English. So we've got to think about the fact that English words have been adopted by other languages, and just as we've also, it's been an exchange. English words have been adopted, other languages have taken our words, we've taken words from other languages. This is a universal exchange. But there are also, as a result, these universal words like hotel, taxi, internet, that almost every student will know. So if your student says those words, don't be fooled into thinking maybe they're a higher level. Those are universal terms used absolutely everywhere. And your student may still very well be an absolute beginner. Right. So let's get on to the next bit of information. So it may well be that your beginners surprise you by knowing a little bit more than you had expected. So some students, as you can see on the slide, some students may have studied English in school many, many years ago, but may have forgotten most of it. That happens. With some exposure, some of it comes back. And these students are called false beginners. So these students, think about it, are sitting on a pile of English. It might be odds and ends that they've forgotten, but they have some kind of background. And just to reiterate, these are called false beginners. The reason is they're beginner, but they know something. They're not starting from zero, but they are very, very close to it. So far, just to recap, we have absolute beginners and then we have false beginners. Absolute being starting from zero, and false beginners, they're a beginner, but they know something. They know a little bit. They've been to school. They might have forgotten it, but they have a basic, very basic foundation of English. Those are false beginners. All right. So in class, you may have a mixture of absolute and false beginners. And this is normal. This is absolutely normal. So the idea is not to get overwhelmed, not to panic. Everything we see today will be suitable for both categories of beginner. And while it can seem a little scary at first to have some students marginally better than others in class, remember just to keep calm and carry on. The techniques we will see in this presentation are perfectly valid for both absolute and false beginners. So don't be tempted. This is tempting. Don't be tempted to teach the best student in the class. In other words, focusing on what that student knows. And what happens is the others will feel alienated. The majority of the students who maybe are real beginners will feel bad that they cannot understand or they cannot keep up. So remember, your strongest student is not your jumping off point. You need to work with the bulk, the majority of the students. And most likely, they're going to be real beginners or absolute beginners, as we said earlier. Right, so something important to do is to really put yourself in your beginner's shoes for a moment, just to understand what sort of emotions they're feeling. And something important to remember is that we've all been a beginner something at some point, whether you're a beginner learning another language, whether you're a beginner in a cooking class, whether you're a beginner at university in your very first class, a beginner at work, a new job. You're a beginner at some point or another in your life. And the important thing is to reflect. Remember, think about how you felt and sort of use that in the classroom to imagine how your beginners might be feeling. There are emotions like excited and eager, but also potentially nervous, overwhelmed, self-conscious, and extremely self-critical, especially for adult students. who are learning from scratch, it can be a very confronting experience, because if you think about it, adults, lots of them have not been in the classroom for a very, very long time. Plus, on top of it all, they're a beginner at the language. So that's something very important to take into consideration. Perhaps they're stressed because they need the English for work or their business. Perhaps they don't really want to be there, and they feel, obliged to learn it. Perhaps they feel terrified of looking foolish or making mistakes in front of you or other students. And maybe they feel overwhelmed after 10 minutes and experience mental block. All of these feelings are natural, and they are very rarely a reflection of you on you as a teacher. That is something very important to remember, is that when your beginners panic, when they feel unmotivated, when they feel all those things that we mentioned earlier, not a reflection of you as a teacher. So don't panic if this happens. If you feel some kind of negativity coming back at you at first, very often it's not you, it's just how they're feeling at that moment in time. So try your very best to remain upbeat, to remain patient and supportive at all times. Because remember, those are also things they pick up on. Even, they might think that, okay, even though I'm not giving a lot, my teacher is still trying. My teacher is still upbeat. My teacher is still encouraging me. And that very often pulls them out of their funk and puts them right on the same page where you are. Right, so something very important to remember, it's not you. If you go away with nothing else today from this webinar, please go away with that. All right, so how do we make them feel better? What can we do to counteract these negative feelings? And there are luckily lots and lots of things we can do. So as well as maintaining your positive, upbeat demeanor, you can, as we said, be positive, be upbeat, but also keep your TTT to an absolute minimum. We're going to deep dive a little bit later on, but for those of you who have already scratched around on the online course, your TTT is your teacher talking time. And then also scaffolding, scaffold continuously. The next point is set well-graded tasks. And then also use lots and lots of well-chosen or carefully chosen visual aids. After, if you think about scaffolding, what does this mean to you? So think about the term scaffolding, think about what it means in its literal sense, and then think about what it could possibly mean in teaching. So scaffolding, we will find out a little bit later on, but if you have any ideas as to what scaffolding is, please put it in the chat right now, and we will absolutely take a look at some of your suggestions in a few minutes. So just an instruction, for the next couple of minutes or so, what is your idea or your understanding of scaffolding? How do we scaffold? What does it mean in terms of teaching? All right, so punch that into the chat while we continue, and I will revisit a few of your suggestions later on. All right. Okay, so now we're going to go into these 4 points in a bit more detail, including scaffolding. And some of you have already punched in some good ideas, building off what students already know or building from the ground up. And I'm going to say yes, absolutely. Those 2 ideas form a part of scaffolding. So if we scaffold, we build gradually. We build on what they know. We take things a step at a time, but we're going to get there. But you're absolutely on track. Right. So the first thing we mentioned, if you remember, we were speaking about TTT, teacher talking time. You'll see on the TEFL course that acronym TTT can also stand for something else. But today, in the context of this webinar, yes, it means teacher talking time. I cannot stress enough how important it is to keep your teacher talking time to a minimum. Because if you bombard your students with a lengthy monologue, it will overwhelm them entirely. So use short, simple, and relevant sentences. We get lots of tickets where students are panicking about teaching beginners, saying, if I can only speak English and they don't speak English yet, I don't speak their language, how do I get my point across? Well, I'm going to say less is more. And that is in terms of teacher talk time. So use simple, relevant sentences. And this is especially true, teachers, when giving instructions, right? Give instructions using the imperative. So the imperative is just simple, straightforward instructions. For example, open your book to page 96. Find exercise B. Read point 1. Stand up. Sit down. It doesn't sound very polite, but believe me, your students will thank you for it because the instruction is all they have to focus on. The minute we get too wordy, think about it. It's natural to say, what I want you to do is, or if you don't mind, would you? Those are all little phrases and words that they don't quite know yet. So keep instructions very simple. Use the imperative only. And also, when it comes to explanations, keep things as concise as possible. Meaning will get lost in unessential talking time. If you give a very wordy explanation for something, your students hear all that peripheral monologue and the target language, the tense or the vocabulary that you're trying to get across gets lost in all that, and they don't know what to focus on anymore. And also, when talking, use your body language to support what you are saying. Make gestures for point, listen, work together, etc. And this way, you can support your TTT or teacher talk time with gestures. And this is so much better because then what they do is, if I keep saying to my students, listen, or look, or stand up, sit down. If you accompany those verbal instructions with gestures, what happens? There's an automatic meaning and word connection. And without you having to teach these instructions, they become an organic, almost holistic part of the lesson, and your students just automatically start understanding them. And guess what? Also start listening to them and also start using them. So the more gestures you can accompany your instructions with, the better. And as mentioned earlier, keep those instructions simple. If also with instructions, one instruction at a time. This is something so important for me. If I give an instruction like this, and I want you to listen quite carefully, so I would say to my students, actually I wouldn't, this is an example of a very bad instruction, but here it is. So what I want you to do is find a partner. If you can't find a partner, you can work in threes, or you can work on your own if you want. That's also okay. I want you to find the worksheet on your desk, and I want you to turn it over and also look at exercise B. Do the points from 1 to 7. When you're finished, I want you to compare with your partner, and then we will check the answers together. All right? Something wrong there, right? It's too much. If you're like me, you're going to get lost after the first point. And I speak English. You speak English. So imagine what our students are going through. So when we give instructions, one instruction at a time. And it's very similar to scaffolding. So my instruction broken up would be, right, now we will work with a partner. Hillary, go and sit with Eugenia. Hamza, you will sit with Melissa, and Rachel, you will work with Nathan. Sally Ann, you will work with Joe. Move now, please. And then guess what? Give them time to move. Right. Do you all have a worksheet? Yes, teacher, should be the response. Turn it over. Remember those gestures we spoke about earlier. Turn it over. Correct, good. Find exercise B and then help yourself. Do yourself a favor, write exercise B on the board. So breaking up instructions, I find that my students feel calmer. When I do that, they're calm. They do one instruction at a time. I let them finish. I move on to the next instruction. And while it might take just a second longer, by the time they are ready to start the task, they know exactly what to do. Whereas giving them a quick rambling of an instruction is very quick, yes, time-wise, but by the time they're meant to start the exercise, they don't know what to do. And you're either going to have to repeat the instruction over and over again, or you're going to have to run around class and individually help everyone when you could have just broken those instructions up. With beginners, I find that is a lifesaver in my classroom, and I really hope the same for you. I can almost guarantee it's going to help you. All right, so here we go. We spoke about scaffolding earlier, and a lot of you put in some really, really good suggestions. We have building on existing knowledge, building from the ground up, assessing or building of what the student already knows, setting up foundations for student growth, support in any possible way by giving students some clues, starting at a simpler level and building the skill from there. I like that, Sally Ann. In fact, I like all these suggestions because guess what? They all form a part of scaffolding. A basic foundation, starting building skills and taught from a very basic level. Absolutely. Your suggestions are spot on because this is exactly what scaffolding involves. So let's have a look at the slide. And you'll see that all your ideas are just embedded in the in what scaffolding entails, right? So when we look at scaffolding, in this context means support. Give clear instructions with demonstrations, monitor constantly to spot students who are struggling and offer support, and use task prompts such as sentence stems, for example. Sentence stems. So sentence stems are when we give the student the beginning of a sentence so that they can finish. That makes it so achievable. Think about a beginner class learning everyday routines, right? And learning maybe adverbs of frequency like always, never, sometimes. So sentence stems that I would give a beginner class would be in the morning, I always. In the morning, I sometimes. In the morning, I never. In the afternoon, I always. In the afternoon, I sometimes. In the afternoon, I never, and so on and so on. These are called sentence stems. And the student gets to complete those sentence stems with their own ideas. So it's not too overwhelming. All they have to think of is their own ideas, their own responses, their own experiences, and they get to respond to the content with these while having the support. So you see this word support comes out quite often because, as mentioned earlier, scaffolding in this context means support, starting at a simple level, going up, going up, going up, going up, so that by the time you get up here, your students feel confident and they know what to do. We cannot start here, skip a whole bunch of levels and expect them to produce what we want them to by the end of the process. It needs to be step by step. All right, so as you can see, all your ideas, spot on. And also when it comes to scaffolding, we've also got to really, really model new language carefully. Allow lots and lots of processing time. This is so important. Beginners, more than any other level, have so much going on in their heads. They're listening. They're probably translating into their L1, their first language, then thinking of an answer in their language, and then translating this into English, and then forming the sound and saying the answer. I just want you to run through all those ideas again of what goes on in a beginner's head. Think about it. Students who are advanced or upper intermediate, they think in English, they respond in English. There it is. Beginners, not so much. They start by thinking about something in their language, translating it, then coming up with the answer in English, negotiating the sounds of what that sounds like in English, and then finally producing it. So you've got to give them time to answer your question. Don't assume that they don't know just because they haven't answered in 2 to 3 seconds. In the classroom, silence is not the enemy. It's highly necessary sometimes. And also something you've got to remember is that many, many students go through something called a silent phase. I had a wonderful student in my class a long, long time ago, and she was quiet for about 2 weeks. And I kept thinking, what am I doing wrong here? I was very new at teaching and I kept questioning myself, doubting myself, doing cartwheels in the class, trying to get her to respond, and she wouldn't. And eventually I thought, oh, I'm just going to give up. And then what happens? She just started speaking and she did not stop. And what I did then was research this and I found out it's actually called a silent phase. Lots and lots of beginners go through this. So give them the time to process. And then also to tie in with some of those other points earlier, use visuals wherever possible to support comprehension and integrate as much pair and group work as possible because what this does is it doesn't just make the lessons teacher centered, but makes the lessons student centered. And it also gives them an idea of what it's going to sound like to communicate with people outside of the parameters of the classroom and not just depend on the teacher. So, pair and group work once students know exactly what they're doing, is a great way for your students to relax a little. If everyone is talking at once, they don't feel so exposed and they're likely to try saying things that they might not attempt if speaking in front of you or in front of the whole class. I very often try to avoid activities where beginners have to produce language in front of everyone because they feel overwhelmed. I think back to when I was studying another language, I was studying Italian, and my teacher would have us mingle, and this was okay. I felt comfortable making mistakes. And then every now and then, we of course had to produce something in front of the class, and I'd freeze up and I would produce something completely off topic or incorrect or inaccurate. Meanwhile, knowing how to produce it, but making that mistake because I felt overwhelmed in the moment. So think about that before tweaking and revising your tasks. Make them comfortable for your class. And that brings me to the next point, all about tasks, right? So make sure that your tasks are simple and achievable. That word achievable is so important to me. This is one fundamental, as giving our beginners tasks that are too difficult will crush their confidence and motivation. So, very important to set well graded tasks. Tasks must be simple and achievable. This is important because they need to feel like they've accomplished something at the end of the day. And if the task is too overwhelming or they haven't had enough preparation time, they haven't done enough examples, by the time they have to maybe do a speaking task or something where they've got to showcase what they've learned, they won't feel prepared. So prepare them thoroughly, do examples, provide support via useful language, and make them feel ready to tackle the task. If you find that you have chosen a task that is too easy for them, and that happens, or if the student finishes before the others do, that happens too, you can easily add in some elements like more questions or sentence writing or more discussion just to fill those gaps and to give those people who finish quickly something constructive to do. Right, and then also keep your task wording short and uncluttered. Your students, for us, it's very natural to read something, maybe even something text heavy, and we're okay. But our beginners feel really overwhelmed. So keep your wording short and uncluttered. Use the target language as much as possible during the course of the lesson. So the target language I refer to here is whatever you're teaching your students in that lesson, whether it be a new set of vocabulary, whether it be a new tense, whether it be a few new useful phrases that they've got to use. Use the target language, expose them to it as much as possible. Of course, in the beginning of the lesson, not so much because you're going to try and introduce it slowly. But once you've introduced the target language, try and incorporate it everywhere. Students need to be exposed to new target language, what is it, almost 17 times before they know it. So get them started on that in your lesson. And then also, this is something very important to me, and as a teacher, it'll be to you too, is avoid using language that is too difficult for them. Right? So when we say language, of course it's English, that's a given. But when we speak about language in the classroom, we mean vocabulary and grammar. So if you're teaching beginners, you cannot be using tenses that they haven't learned yet. You cannot be using vocabulary that they haven't learned yet. Drop the TEFL terminology. That's for you to plan with, not to use in the classroom. If you want them to work in pairs, tell them I want you to work together. If you want them to split up, don't say split up. They won't know what that means. Tell them, Hamza, go and sit over there. Rachel, go and sit over there. Keep your language as simple as possible. And then also scaffold by doing an example yourself first. This is key. Remember, we said scaffolding is all about support, building structures throughout your lesson to take your students one level higher at a time. So, one way of doing that is when you give them a task, do an example for them. If it's a written task like a gap fill, do number one. If it's a matching activity, do the first one. If they've got to find a word in a dictionary, find one together with them first. If they've got to introduce themselves to another student, you do it first, maybe with the student sitting up front. So always do an example first. And something I'd like you to even write down now is to model the task. Do it first yourself so that they can see what they have to do. I guarantee you this will really, really reduce the amount of times they stick up their hands and say, I don't know what to do or I don't understand. So always do an example yourself. It will simplify your instructions so much. Right. And then also examples of tasks. If you some examples of possible tasks, matching lexical items to pictures. This is very much suitable for a beginner. Remember earlier I said to you, match your gestures with the words you're saying. This is a similar concept. You have the picture, you have the word, and immediately that visual just reinforces the meaning of that new word. Doing simple gap fills for target language accuracy. Having guided conversations with sentence stems and visual support, and short interviews to practice question formation. And when you want them to ask questions, maybe give them a set of questions. When you want them to talk about something topic related, give them a few pictures. If you want them to ask each or speak to each other about daily routines, give them those STEM sentences. It really, really helps because your students have that support and all they need to do is fill in the relevant target language. They feel so accomplished by the end of this process and they feel happy with their progress. As teachers, we often adapt course book activities and so on to make them more suitable. We make a text shorter, we add in more questions, we take some out maybe, we make a task look more attractive and accessible. And I can tell you, I've seen that by the assignments I've been marking from you. A simple task gets embellished with a few pictures and instantly it becomes appealing and learners would want to engage. So well done on that. Keep doing it. So in other words, try not to be a slave to the course book if it isn't serving you well. Adapt as far as you can and make it more user-friendly for your bunch. Get to know your students and really tweak things so that they find the content appealing. Right, and the next thing we were talking about is using visuals, and that's important. Make sure that you use plenty of pictures in the classroom. Make sure that your learners have plenty of visual stimulation, so pictures, photos, drawings. And then there's that funny little term, realia. Realia is real content that we bring in from outside to reinforce meaning. So if you want them to understand what a glass is, you could bring in a glass. If you want them to understand what perfume is, you could bring in a bottle of perfume. Remember to take that home. So realia are things that we bring in from outside to reinforce or to clarify meaning. And then also there's body language and facial expressions. Posters on the wall could help, graphic organizers for tasks, and videos. These are all visual aids that really, really will help your students just to latch onto the meaning of a new word or concept. Using realia is really, really interesting for students. It helps them anchor the new language in real life, and it makes it easier for them to remember. I know it is for me. So as mentioned before, realia, use gestures to support what you say. We spoke about that earlier. Also, acting out emotions, scenarios. This also helps to convey meaning. Posters with common classroom language that are very helpful. For example, how do you say something in English? How do you say that? How do you spell that? Can you say that again? If you don't have a poster, you can simply write these in the corner of your board, leave it there permanently so that your learners can refer to it whenever they have a question. And then also graphic organizers such as tables and charts and word maps and mind maps, spidergrams. These can really appeal to logical and organized learners. And you might have a few of those, quite a few of those in your classroom. Right, so just a few final tips before we get on to Q&A. When it comes to beginners, um, modeling is very, very important. If you're teaching them new words, model what they've got to say. If you're doing a task, model how it's got to go. And then also drilling new language. So, particularly with new words, pronunciation is important, right? So, when we're teaching new words, for us, it's easy. We've said that those words 1,000 times, but for our learners, these are brand new sounds put together to form a new word. So drilling is repetition. You can have choral drilling as a group. You can have one-on-one drilling. And it's all so important. It's rehearsal time for accuracy. So remember, when you're teaching new words, and a lot of teachers tend to skip this step. So they've elicited the new word, they've written the new word down, they've asked their students to identify its word class. All fantastic, all necessary. They say the word a couple of times, the class says it a couple of times, and then guess what? They move on to the next word. They don't know for sure whether those learners really know how to say the word. Do they know where to stress the word? What does the word sound like in a sentence? What does the word sound like in a question? So drilling is important. Please don't forget it. I'm drilling this right now. Remember drilling. And then also, some teachers don't, they see nothing wrong with using L1 in the classroom, the student's first language. But here at the TEFL Academy, we tend to disagree a little. We do not use the first language of the student because the students tend to rely on you for translation rather than trying to work things out for themselves. And also, what you've got to remember is that you might not always have a monolingual class. You might be working at a language school where there are learners from 17 different countries, or you might have people in one country but with different dialects. So it is important to remember that using the first language of your students should really be a last resort because your students really do use it as a crutch. They rely on you for translation, as mentioned earlier, rather than working things out for themselves. It's hard initially for them to get used to an English-only environment, this total immersion experience, and they might try to speak their first language, or they might try, it gets a little confusing for them. It is hard, but the payoffs are huge if you keep your class English only. Right, so just to cover those tips again, model, drill, very important for pronunciation. Avoid their first language if you can. Help them work things out in English. When my students say, teacher, translator, I always say, no, I'm your translator. I'm going to explain this. I get out some pictures, I get out some realia, and it helps them understand the concept. Also, my terrible drawings have become very, very useful in the classroom, and I know yours can too. Right, so that's it from my side, and now it's over to you. But before we end with the presentation, I just want to remind you that teaching beginners is such an honor. For me, it's been such an honor. We are those teachers, when we teach beginners, we get to see that journey from walking into the classroom and not being able to say anything. And we basically travel along with them, and we see them at that point where they can actually have a conversation with someone, or ask questions, or explain something, or tell you a little bit about their background or where they're from. And to watch that transition is absolutely beautiful. And for me, all levels are special. All levels have something to give, and all levels enrich you and your experience as a teacher. But there's nothing quite like having a beginner class going from nothing to something. So I will tell you it's exhausting, but it is So rewarding and so much fun. Also, remember that beginners are learners, they're learning. So, even if things sound a little funny in the classroom, encourage rather than make, do not make fun of them, do not laugh at them. Even if things sound a little funny, encourage them and make them feel like mistakes are okay in your classroom. It's something not in this presentation, but for me, it is so important that my learners feel that the classroom is the place to make the mistakes. I always tell them, make as many mistakes as you can right here. This is where we make our mistakes so that when we go outside and we use this new target language or this new grammar or this new vocabulary, then you use it beautifully. So here, make as many mistakes as you feel you need to. And that immediately just diffuses the situation and gets them comfortable. So remember with beginners, just enjoy the process and make it as comfortable for them as possible. And you will end up having a lot of fun. Right, so that brings me to Q&A. I see some of you telling me you enjoyed the webinar. I'm very happy because such important stuff here today, right? So it is Q&A, and I'm going to answer all those important questions that you have. So please, if you have a few questions based on beginners, this topic that we specifically spoke about today, put them in the chat right now, and I will get to them. I'll get to as many as I can, right? All right, so Tipsy Teletubby has asked, what shall I do? Let me display the question on the screen for you. All right. What shall I do if a student won't grasp the meaning of a word or phrase unless I translate it for them? Some concepts are way too hard to understand without a translation. I will tell you that at beginner level, they're not really learning those abstract concepts yet anyway. They're learning very functional language, and they're learning language about their immediate environments, the stuff they see around them. So I hear you, and I know that some concepts are difficult to explain without translating, but also remember that because we scaffold and because we're teaching beginners beginner content, it's very unlikely that you'll be teaching abstract and critical thinking concepts at beginner level. So those ideas that are difficult to get across are usually explained away with some good visuals or a little skit or a drawing or using the word in a nice simple sentence for them. It's called a context sentence for them to be able to understand the meaning. So I hear you, but we'll be teaching those abstract concepts much later on anyway. And that's something really encouraging to hold on to as a teacher of a beginner. I hope that helps. All right, and then we have a few more questions, and punch them in, please. We've got a little bit of time. Punch those questions in, and I'll try and get to as many of them as possible. We've got another question from, I think it's Karine Janse van Rensburg. Hello, Karine. Thank you so very much. You're welcome. Will this webinar still be available afterwards to watch again? Karine, all our webinars are available afterwards to watch. And yes, this one will certainly be so too. So what you need to do is, send us, if you don't have our YouTube channel saved somewhere on your laptop, you just send us a message to tutor support and say, hey, I'd like the link for the webinars, and we'll send you a link that will literally take you to all the past webinars. And this one specifically, Karine, will probably be up and available in a few days' time. They normally just take a couple of days to upload, but keep checking in and you'll find it. All right, and enjoy them. There are so many others to watch. All right. Okay, so Nathan says, thank you for the wonderful presentation. You're very welcome. When it comes to pronunciation of English, oh, Nathan, you're opening a can of worms here. There are some words with silent letters. How can we make sure to avoid confusion for students? That is a good question, Nathan, because I will tell you at various levels, students from other countries, based on their language systems, they want to say what they see. So let's talk about the word should. right? Should. There's an L in that word. And so many of your students, mark my words, will say should or could. It's very, very common because they see the letter. So drilling helps, Nathan, by repetition and having them say it back and forth, back and forth. Also, the phonetic chart. I don't recommend the phonetic chart with beginners, but with higher levels, it certainly helps. Writing the word phonetically so that they can see, physically see there is no L sound in that word, absolutely, absolutely helps. Get out of jail free card because it's right there, visually showing them there is no L sound in this word. But with very low levels like beginners, lots and lots of drilling. Drill, drill, drill. I think it's called drilling because it's so repetitive. It's a slightly long process, but it gets results. All right, so let's see. Jennifer, thank you for emphasizing how important processing time is. Yes. What is a good amount of time to allow for responses? So, Jennifer, this would very much vary according to what you've asked them, the task at hand. If it's a question that I ask my students about target language we've already learnt, I mean, give them a good few seconds. You know, they're not just going to give the like if you say to them, right, if I'm tired, I want to, and they don't say sleep, give them a little bit of time. Someone else might shout out the answer. Or if you nominate specific students and that student has to answer, give them a few seconds. Check in with them. I want to give them yeah. And then if they don't, say no problem. Let's see if someone else can help, and then get the answer from them. So that would be call and answer task. But if it's a writing task or any other kind of task, this would depend very much on what the response is that you need and how bulky of a response it is. But I would always say don't just expect immediate answers. As we said earlier, in the mind of a beginner, so much is happening. They hear your question, they translate that question to their language. They think about the answer in their language, they translate that answer to English. Then they negotiate the sounds to put that answer together, and then they attempt to produce it. So depending on what you're asking them, go through the motions, look at what you want from them, add a few seconds onto that, and then move on to the next student if they don't know. All right. And then Sandra has sent us a question also. How can a teacher adjust their lessons to teach an absolute beginner online one-on-one? So I will tell you with difficulty, I've done this before, Sandra. I usually have advanced or upper intermediate students, but every now and then I get sent a lovely beginner student. And Sandra, because of all the great programs out there, your Zoom platforms, your StreamYard platforms, they have the facilities to show images, to put words on the board, to remove words, to put a word and only cover part of the word, to put a picture and cover part of the picture. There are so many different tools that we can use, with these online platforms, that with beginners, it's pretty much the same. In fact, many beginners really, really benefit from online because it's one-on-one. So I really haven't encountered any major issues. And if you're asking about how a lesson differs from classroom to online, absolutely no difference. Your online lessons really should mirror your face-to-face lessons. The only differences would be a few online tools would be used instead of giving them a handout. The handout will be sent to them, via a link. Instead of showing a picture on the board, you will show a picture on the screen. So pretty much the same. The more you can mirror an actual lesson in an online context, the better. All right. Your students really need to feel like it's being in an actual classroom. Just that extra online tools are added so that they can get the same out of their exercises. And also, to revisit this question, breakout rooms. When you put students in pairs in a classroom, lots of online platforms have something called a breakout room or a one-to-one room. It's a simple function, click, put them into separate rooms, and your students are basically in a chat room together where they can hear each other and see each other. And you, as the teacher, can pop in and check that they're on task just like you would in an actual classroom. So pretty much the same. Have fun with that. All right, let's see. From Caton, how much flexibility are we allowed with our lessons and are strict targets set by most employers? So, Caton, if you're working at a language school, there's usually a course book that they want you to use. And that's usually a good and a bad thing. A good thing because your lessons are 50% planned, and all you need to do is add your own ideas, your own flavor, your own visuals. In fact, sometimes there are visuals, but you may want to change those up. But your lessons are semi-planned. The downside is that yes, those parameters are there. By day one, they will have accomplished this. By day two, but with beginners, there is more flexibility because of that differentiate that between, we mentioned it earlier, absolute beginners and false beginners. So there's always a bit of flexibility. Speak to your employer and say, right, this is the situation. I have a beginner class. Some of them know absolutely zero English, and some of them know a little bit. Can I possibly drag this unit over 2 weeks? Can I? And then see how open they are to that. I've done it before, and because we're always in it for the best interest, of the student, it very often is okay. Then also embellish your lessons with visuals. Employers usually have no issue with this at all. When it comes to exams and terms, and they've got to maybe write an exam to go to the next level, these are usually set in stone. But again, your students will not want to move up a level if they don't feel ready yet. And then they have the choice very often of staying in that level a little bit longer and then testing at a later stage. So with beginners, I would say take it at the pace of your class. If you find that that pace is faster or slower than the school have set out for you, chat with your employers, chat with your academic managers, and explain the situation to them. Because at the end of the day, we want what's best for the students, whether it be the teacher or the head of the school. All right. Okay, so great question, Eugenia. Would you suggest a complete lesson on pronunciation? So it depends. Very often when you're teaching vocabulary, you address the vocabulary of the pronunciation of those words in that lesson. When you're teaching a grammar lesson on, for example, the past simple, you will teach pronunciation aspects connected to that tense. So pronunciation kind of forms part of every single lesson, right? But I think, Eugenia, you're asking, how about a pronunciation lesson? So sometimes we do that when we're teaching, for example, minimal pairs, or when we're teaching a brand new sound, or when we're teaching, certain word endings. Then yes, we could have a lesson, but just be aware that the pronunciation, yes, it's great, but the words you're teaching them, the vehicle that you're using, it still needs to be in graded language so that your learners do not feel overwhelmed. But at the end of the day, yes, we do have pronunciation classes, and the core of those is usually to focus on either one sound per lesson, like maybe it's the ed sound at the end of the verb. So like walked, talked, played. We don't say walked or talked or played. So that takes up a whole lesson very often. Or minimal pairs where just a certain part of the word is different to the next, but generally they're all the same. That could be a lesson too. So yes, we absolutely do have pronunciation lessons, but also, yes, bear in mind that pronunciation is a part of every single lesson. All right. You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's see if I can answer another question here. All right, for a young beginner who keeps using their mother language, oh, it's so normal though, so natural in class and doesn't seem to understand the idea to only use English. What strategies are there? So, Poc, I will tell you that teachers have tried all kinds of techniques through the years, from ignoring students when they speak their mother tongue, or just putting on sort of a dumbfounded face, like I don't understand you. That I've done that on a few occasions, and they tend to kind of correct themselves and then reattempt in English. or I just sort of fold my arms and shrug my shoulders, you know, I don't understand. And then they try. I do also just reinforce the English only rule. So those are up all over the school in general, English only, English only. As they walk into the class, there'll be a sign up, English only. And the minute they start speaking in their own language, I just say to them, nah, English only. And then they correct themselves and they go into English. And I will say it is quite important, Pacman, to limit the use of their own language. Otherwise, they're not going to learn much. They're not going to attempt the new English structures. So you're right to ask this question, and I would absolutely remind them all the time. All the time. Oh, and teething stages in the beginning, you just find yourself doing it all through the lesson, and it's okay because eventually they catch on. So I just remind my students English only, and then they try and they reattempt in English. I hope that works for you. All right. So Laura has asked what to do when students get stuck or are too shy, and this is every day. Students feel the same way we do in a brand new setting, and they make mistakes. And based on those mistakes, they don't really want to produce again. This is an ever natural occurrence in the class. So when that happens, allow them to feel shy. It's okay, and find other ways of getting them to produce. So, Laura, what I found helps a lot is instead of getting them to respond to me, I put them in pairs and I let them practice the activity together. And all I do is walk around and monitor. And very often I find that they produce more that way because they're speaking to a peer and they're speaking to someone who makes mistakes just like they do. However, if they get stuck, if they're in the middle of a task and they can't move forward based on a mistake that they're making, that's when I would interject and help them out just to get them back on track. So remember, there's nothing wrong with error correction. There's nothing wrong with cozying up to a student and just sort of helping them with something that's difficult. But in most cases, I find that they get unstuck and unshy when they're in groups and pairs. They just feel so much more comfortable because I guess they feel like they're in a setting where other people are feeling the same and making the same mistakes. Pair work and group work, that helps a lot. All right. With beginners, is fluency or accuracy more important? It's a mix. But I will tell you that beginners are very much bound by structure in the beginning. That's why we teach lexical chunks rather than separate words, or, we teach them bits and chunks so that they can use them effectively. So I will say it's a mix. But then when it comes to fluency is more about just giving them a bit of freedom with the target language. So first we focus on the accuracy and then we give them the opportunity to practice it in a more relaxed, fluency based atmosphere. But I will say with beginners, they need a lot of structure, accuracy before they get that freedom with the target language. So fluency is quite a strong word for beginners, but we find ways of getting them to speak as naturally as possible, even at their level. And we've got a few very, very good suggestions in our online course that will help you out with that. All right. And I'm going to take this one last question because I think it's a great question. Just curiosity. Let me try and get that up again. Do you find it easier to teach beginners compared to higher levels? It's got its difficulties, and I really don't want to sound like it's a cop out because I'm saying yes and no, but it is really yes and no. You find that with beginners it's easier because they just want to learn. There's nothing else there. They just want to learn. They're not going to corner you with difficult questions. They're not going to corner you to try and catch you out or see if teacher knows what she's talking about. They just want to learn, and they're so much more giving, and they really try. And also, if you make a mistake, it's usually not a big deal in the class. Of course, you're going to try and correct it and be as accurate as possible. But if you do, it's not really a train smash. So when it comes to beginners, that's the easy side of it. The difficult side is that, yes, you need to supplement your lessons with visuals and realia and all these extra resources just to help them understand something. So the hard work and the difficulty is maybe in the preparation, whereas the easiness is just that they just want to learn and they don't ask really complicated questions. So that helps a lot too. All right, so I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to stop there with the questions. Oh my goodness, we could carry on with this webinar for 2, 3 hours just with Q&A, and I think still we wouldn't have reached the top. So I do appreciate all your questions. Please do send these questions to tutor support so that we can continue answering all your important questions. Please don't stop asking questions. As a new teacher, it's all you should do, and we really appreciate that. So thank you for joining today. I really, really appreciated you being here. Same time, same place next week. Please join these webinars. They're so good, they're so useful. But also, we need a bit of input. So I'm going to be putting the survey on the screen for you. And we'd really like you to join these webinars as mentioned. Fill in the survey. It really is ever so helpful for us. I'm also going to put the survey link at the end of the chat function. Just hang on, it should be right there. I'm so glad to hear that. Erica says the webinar was helpful and easy to understand. I'm happy to hear that. They're meant to be. And if they're difficult or if you miss anything, you can rewatch and rewatch and rewatch and ask us as many questions as you like on tutor support. All right, so all of you, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be safe out there. Survey going up on the screen right now. Take care. Bye. See you next time.